Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight to our series of studies on human beings and in conflicts, challenge for the conscious being, where we explore our unconscious to help us enhance our mental health, our spirituality, and our wholeness, based on the teachings of Joanna de Angelis. I'm Fabrício Assunção from the Spirit Society of Bournemouth, and it's great to have here with us tonight our Dr. Anahy Fonseca from the Spirit Medical Association of Brazil. Tonight, the study topic is about contemporary disease. Um, so this evening, Anahy will give us a PowerPoint presentation with the main ideas brought by Joanna de Angelis and other authors. Then we will have time for questions and answers, follow a time for us to share first-hand experience related to our study. Let me now give you a few words of introductions about Dr. Anahy Fonseca. She's a psychiatrist and a founding member of the Department of Psychiatry and Spirituality at the Psychiatry Association of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. For some time, 30 years, she has been working in psychotherapy, diagnosis, and research on the relationship between spirituality and mental health. She is also a Jungian analyst and member of the Medical Spiritist Association of Brazil, where she teaches Spiritist psychology by the Joana de Angelis. Now, over to you, Anahy, for tonight's study on contemporary disease.
Thank you, Fabrício. Hello, everyone. So it's a great topic. I'll just share the PowerPoint presentation. Oh, it's you have to enable me. Send
Okay,
request.
is now able.
Yeah. All right. So that we can see the main topics, and then we can discuss a little bit afterwards. Is that okay, Fabrício?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very good.
Okay, so this is our study group of human beings in conflict, challenge for the conscious being. And today we're going to be talking about contemporary psychological problems. Okay. I brought to you some pictures that we can find in the internet, just so we can connect with what Joanna de Angelis is talking about when she's talking about contemporary psychological problems. So this is the dark side of the world that we are living in with our problems. This picture here above has won a prize in Brazil. It's from São Paulo, unfortunately, the largest city in Brazil. And I don't know from where. It's someplace in Europe, but you can find around the globe, unfortunately. I think it's a soccer game or something like that. But then I brought to you a little bit of Johann Henrik Pestalozzi, that he was actually, I don't know if you know about that, but he was Allan Kardec's teacher. The thing is that before, I think everybody knows by now, before calling himself Allan Kardec, his name was Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, a French professor. I was very, with a lot of books and influenced pretty much the reform of, in France, of the education. So Rivail was still a teenager when he was sent to study at the institute in the Swiss town of Yverdon, founded by the most original educator in Europe at that point, the centuries 18 and 19, that was Johann Henrik Pestalozzi. So I know that many of you have already read the text that we are studying tonight and the previous meeting, but I thought it was very interesting because Allan Kardec, we all know, was a scientific man. And when he, in France in the 19th century, started to pay attention to all that communication that started coming from the spiritual realms that many people didn't believe. And he started using actually the scientific method. And because of what we are studying tonight, I found it was very interesting to see what Pestalozzi, who was Reveil's teacher, actually, so it helped Reveil to unfold, let's say, or to express his personal myth. Remember that Jung says that each one of us has a personal myth, has a sacred story that our soul comes here to develop and to practice, let's say. So it's very interesting, I think, to see the way that spirituality, of course, prepares a person to really be a missionary or someone that is going to help change and bring new paradigms, change consciousness and bring new paradigms. So Pestalozzi says that humanity develops in three stages: the natural state, that are instincts, natural impulses; the social state, that are laws and norms that contain and regulate the impulse for life in society; and the moral state, that is the goal to be achieved. And for Pestalozzi, we are spiritual beings and not just biological and social. And therefore, we are capable of transcending instinct and overcoming the coercion of laws, which has its usefulness in the development process, to live on the plane of moral autonomy. So, to go to the next stage, we should be able to transcend and overcome the coercion of laws so that we can live on the plane of moral autonomy. He said that in the natural state, we are the work of nature because of the instincts. In the social state, we are the work of social laws. And in the moral state, we are the work of ourselves. Isn't that exactly what Joanna tells us, right? So these states are necessary instances for the divine blossoming of the soul, but they must be integrated from a higher perspective. It is important that we live at a level of moral autonomy, that is, that our actions are ethical and express our deepest and most internal values, and that they are not reduced to soulless rituals, that they are not lost in institutional rigidity that makes us fight against each other. So you see, it's a kind of in the same path that Joanna goes in the text that we are discussing tonight, right? Because when Pestalozzi, of course, Jung wasn't born yet, right? But see how many thinkers bring the same idea, people, because it's archetypal, because it's in our transpersonal dimension of the psyche, right? As Jung calls our collective unconscious, the development of the soul, right? We could say to evolve, it's something that it's archetypal, right? We all have this like this attraction. Joanna talks about, we have already talked in previous meetings, what she calls deotropism, right? It's like a movement towards God, towards the unity. that we call God, the transcendent one that we call God. So Pestalozzi was already, of course, talking about that with Allan Kardec when he was a teenager, right? That we should act, our actions should be ethical and express our deepest and most internal values, not the values of the ego only, because they are influenced, as we are going to see, by culture, by traumas, by our the environment that we are born and right, and the time that we live. But these are values of the ego, our consciousness of this personality. But as Jung says, and Joanna says even in a deeper way, because she says that as just a reminder that the self, Jung self, capital S, is the spirit. So we bring with us from past experiences ethical and moral values that the spirit has already gained, let's say, okay? So that's why we should really pay attention to our inner world, right? Where these values and ethical actions, for instance, have their basis, let's say. So, and see what Pestalozzi says, that it's important that they are not reduced to soulless rituals, that they are not lost in institutional rigidity, right? That makes us fight against each other. So pay attention to what keeps us from our inner, deepest world and to the moral and supposedly ethical attitudes of others. But if yourself, if your imago Dei, that it's another name for the self, the image of God within, right, says otherwise, says, no, this is not ethical. So, of course, I shouldn't pay attention to what people are saying, but what my inner world is saying, right? So, in The Awakening of the Spirit, the book by Joanna, psychographed by Divaldo in the year 2000, these first PowerPoints we have already seen in the past meeting, the first two, but I brought again so that we can make it clear our thoughts about the subject. So she says the human being is a complexity of transcendent values that blend together in depth, having their roots in the inexhaustible sources of cosmic life. So, of course, you see that she is saying something. I think this sentence is so beautiful. She's saying something in a deeper way, as Pestalozzi said, but it's basically the same thing. Any attempt to reduce he/she to merely organic equipment under the control of the brain neurons does not achieve the objectives indispensable to understanding his/her reality. Knowledge of the spirit as the basic reality of organic existence enables the understanding of the objectives that must be sought during the carnal experience, a necessary stage in the process of evolution, through which the seeds of wisdom and love that are present within it blossom. So it doesn't matter, even if the person is a psychopath, for instance, is the worst kind of person that we can imagine. Joanna is saying that he or she also has the seeds of wisdom and love that will at some point blossom, okay, in their spirit. Okay, but now it's a summary of the texts that you all have read and that are in Fabrizio has sent to the WhatsApp group. But the lust for speed in an untamed yearning to enjoy more pleasure and gain time, which becomes a true tormentor of feelings and aspirations, has been transforming the human being into a robot who has lost existential meaning and lives for pursuits whose goals are never achieved due to the constant change in the meaning of each one. We should pay a lot of attention to what Jonah is calling us. The lust for speed. Everything is quick nowadays, right? Um, we read things quickly, we talk very briefly, we don't have time, we don't call in the phone anymore again, right? It's just a WhatsApp message. Of course, we wouldn't have time to talk because we have many times because we have expanded a lot of our tasks, let's say. But of course, if I have, for instance, um, a grandmother who is alive, or an old aunt, or an old relative, whatever, he's not in the same chronos time, the time of our clock. People, when they age, they are in the Kairos time, the psychological time. And you can see, even if they don't have dementia, for instance, any kind of dementia, you see that they will love when you ask them about the past. Have you realized that? And I would love, for instance, to talk with my father-in-law because he was such great, storyteller. He would love to tell me, he was from from the beginning of last century. So he would tell me stories about the way that people lived, about stories of the family, my husband's family. And he would love that. So when you are telling stories that are very emotional and have an emotions connected to them, you are not in chronos. You are not in the time of the clock. You are in the time of kairos. So it's the time, a psychological time that it's kind of almost out of chronological time, okay? So if we are always taking, of course, here we have to pay attention to time, right, Fabrizio? Otherwise, we are going to be the whole night because I get caught by emotion when I talk about Joanna de Angelis. But the thing is that, of course, we need to pay attention to time. But what I'm talking about is that sometimes we can open times in our schedule to read something that's very inspiring, to just look, as we were talking with Sylvia here previously, to the flowers. I know that in England, the flowers are blossoming. So, right, to the changes of nature, for instance, to the sky above, to the stars, to connect with our inner soul, with our spirit, right? So Joanna says that the overpopulation of cities, dehumanizing them, strips the individual of character who comes to live exclusively for the power that can offer convenience and enjoyment, considering other people as disposable, avoiding effective bonds with them due to the fear they harbor of being used and forgotten in an unconscious mechanism about the behavior they maintain in relation to others. So this is also very important, right? The overpopulation of the city. I know that in the pandemic, I don't know around the globe if it's the same thing happened, but people were leaving the big cities and trying to go to small cities because you see how important it is if you are stuck inside your house. There is kind of an urge, right? To be connected to nature. I've read in the pandemic that people were buying even artificial plants to put in the house because they needed the green, they needed nature because they couldn't get out of the house, right? So it's very important that we don't pay attention to, to this urge to live exclusively for the power that can offer convenience and enjoyment. Power is it's an illusion because our lifetime is really short here. Emmanuel, that is Chico Xavier mentor, said that like in terms of eternity, one lifetime, even if you live like 100 years, it's like a split second, right? Compared to the eternity of the spirits. So, so this is very important because if we don't pay attention, Joanna is saying we end this in this narcissistic, and unfortunately, we have a lot of global leaders that are showing this narcissistic posture of focusing only in power and money and this kind of stuff. So what happens is that we avoid effective bonds, right? And we kind of harbor feelings of fear, emotions of fear, and we keep in this very unconscious mechanisms, avoiding deeper relationships. So Joanna says that selfishness begins to rule human conduct, and everyone becomes embroiled in an endless struggle to seize the best and largest share, even if this results in calculated loss to those who share their social group. So she says that in these conglomerates, cunning seems to replace intelligence, and immediacy disrupts all the ethical manifestations that are part of the achievements of intelligence and civilization. And then she says that social economic contrasts proliferate, as the picture that I showed you about Sao Paulo, unfortunately. Proliferate, and immediately social moral ones follow, separating individuals. The first rise to inviolable positions, while the second are cast into the slums of shame, extreme poverty, and abandonment, where heinous crimes and indifference to life flourish, unless the same were to happen within understandable proportions with the privileged groups where abundance and boredom prevail. And boredom. So we see that, unfortunately, Joanna talks about drugs and different, problems that come from this boredom, we could say. In this realm, filled with the thorns of insensitivity towards the suffering of others, the abandonment of starving and sick crowds, and the moral discomfort that spreads, ethical values, in turn, also come to be challenged by those who consider themselves privileged, claiming the right to any conduct that money conceals and society accepts. And we can see all around the globe absurds, like people, for instance, professing that they are Christians, for instance, or they are from some religions that, of course, you shouldn't kill if you are from some of these religions, and going to wars and making wars all over the globe and selling guns and stuff like that. So where are the ethical values, especially if you say that you have a moral that is, for a higher higher leaders, spiritual leaders that come from higher spiritual leaders. It's nonsensical. The inversion of individual and collective psychological content demonstrates the moral and spiritual immaturity of individuals and social groups whose existential goals were tied during the formation of their personalities to utilitarianism, the conquest of power for enjoyment, and the construction of an ego that becomes desensitized in order to escape the responsibility of solidarity and participation duties. So we were talking about the difference between the ego, the moral of the ego, and the morals, let's say, of the self. And Joanna here is calling the attention that we are having an inversion of individual collective psychological content that demonstrates the moral and spiritual immaturity of individuals in many, many societies around the globe, right? And that the conquest of power and the utilitarianism comes from this culture and the construction of an ego that becomes desensitized in order to escape the responsibilities of solidarity and participation duties. And in Personal Triumph from 2000, Joanna says, at the same time, the loss of contact of human beings with their self, capital S, so the Imago Dei, inner Imago Dei, right? Crushed by the moral decay that is rampant amidst a succession of scandals that shock and then quickly disappear, leaves a false impression that happiness is achieved through the pursuit of power for pleasure and by having money to buy power. This completes the vicious cycle of ostentation and downfall, glory under the spotlight of illusion, and immediate oblivion in the dungeons of abandonment to which they are relegated, and of personal conflict that emerges and dominates. This is so, so important that, and that's why Jung's depth psychology that Joanna uses a lot Jung says that we should pay reverence, pay a lot of attention to our inner world and to the symbols and messages that come from ourselves, capital S. So our spirits, because is the bigger personality, as he says. The ego is this small personality. The self is our higher self, let's say. It's the big personality and has all the information, let's say, that it's important for our development in this life and to fulfill our soul's mission, okay? So Joanna is calling our attention that we are losing contact with ourselves, and that the self is crushed by the moral decay that is rampant amidst a succession of scandals, and that leaves a false impression that happiness is achieved through the pursuit of power for pleasure and having money. And that this, of course, goes round and round in a vicious cycle. The almost total disregard for human values, Joanna says, and for the individual as such, with the resulting unchecked ambition to amass wealth at any cost, is an affront of the extreme poverty of poor neighborhoods which cast their forgotten and excluded onto the streets and avenues of the world. These individuals, armed with violence, seek to forcibly take everything that humanity's duty has denied to them. And fear takes hold in society, which is itself sick and restless. There is an urgent need for an ethical shift to enable individuals to reclaim their identity as citizens, no longer as exploited victims in their capacity as human beings, and no longer discriminated against for their poverty, race, or adopted behavioral ideology, provided that it does not infringe on the rights of others. In addition to these psychosocial and socio-economic factors, which are themselves of a profound spiritual and causal nature, one faces a significant challenge in readjusting society and preserving the balance of the human being. A valid psychotherapeutic approach must be structured towards the discovery of the whole being and the existential purpose that can be attained by all. I think Joanna de Angelis, together with Jung, bring a very valid psychotherapeutic approach. The cure for such evils must occur through the patient's process of becoming aware, who will joyfully discover the meaning of existence and the path to follow in a state of peaceful consciousness. So, awareness of ourselves, of our inner conflicts, according to Joanna, of our shadows, we could say, enables us to start following this path of joyfully discovering the meaning of existence, okay? And get into a state of peaceful consciousness. And she says, fraternal love as a process of adjustment becomes an immediate necessity, and a new understanding of life takes shape, outlining the guidelines for maintaining society balance and harmony. Bodily existence, Joanna says, is the expansion of spiritual growth and the acquisition of infinite enlightenment resources, which constitute the great goal of human existence waiting to be achieved. So this body existence, people, is very, very precious, right? Because it's the expansion, according to Joanna, of spiritual growth and a form to acquire infinite enlightenment and resources, right? Infinite enlightening resources, which, by the way, constitute, according to her, the great goal of human existence, waiting to be achieved. So you see, if we don't respect our bodily existence, if we fall, as we have read in the texts, if we fall in drug addictions, in abusing alcohol, abusing sex, for instance, and other kinds of abuse that brings unbalance to the body, we are actually not helping or making it more difficult to follow this path of spiritual growth, because we are going to get sick, we are going to get diseases, we are going to get unbalanced mental health, and so on. Okay, so on and so forth. So by overcoming the lower levels of the process, new levels of knowledge and feeling are attained. When one discovers that each step forward offers a greater possibility of overcoming new challenges. That's evolution. And now, because we want to have time to debate, I was supposed, and we didn't have time in the previous meeting, to bring the symbols of the small story that this is the third meeting that we have seen in the first meeting. Remember the bird? And I just brought quickly that's a picture that I took by the beach. When I heard in a synchronicity before the first meeting, this small story by this Brazilian mystic. A man was walking on the sea, a foot above the water level, and was heading towards an island on which there were many rocks. When he reached it, he remained hovering, transmitting pure neutrality. And when he turned towards the horizon, he saw the red hue of a fire on the continent he had just left. Then a slender and graceful bird approached him and said, "You have reached the land of men who have now become ripe fruits of the great tree and who can bequeath new seeds to the future." So that's the small story. And when I was listening to this story in the podcast, I saw this small bird that was just a slender and graceful bird. So I took the picture because it was a synchronicity. Then after the first encounter, so I was supposed to show you last encounter, our second, look at what I found. I was walking by the beach again. This is some weeks ago when we were in the summertime. I saw this. Can you see that there are three birds? It was after our first meeting. Here, this in another angle of the three birds, the same bird, but there were three. And in the rest of the beach, there was totally empty of birds. I said, what Joanna want me to tell everyone. So I went to look the symbolism of number 3. So the symbolism of the number 3. The number 3 has many symbolic meanings, including harmony, balance, and completeness. It is a number that appears often in fairy tales and is considered to be the perfect number by some. This is from Britannica. Okay, you can find in the encyclopedia. The number 3 is a very mystical and spiritual number, featured in many folk tales: 3 wishes, 3 guesses, 3 little pigs, 3 bears, 3 billy goats gruff. In ancient Babylon, the 3 primary gods were Anu, Bel, and Ea, representing heaven, earth, and abyss. Similarly, there were 3 aspects to the Egyptian sun god, Khepri, rising, Re, midday, and Atum, setting. In Christianity, there is the Trinity of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Plato saw 3 as being symbolic of the triangle, the simplest spatial shape, and considered the world to have been built from triangles. And we have, of course, in ancient Egypt also, Osiris, Isis, and Horus, right? And in Hinduism, we have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, preserver, and Shiva, destroyer. So all around the globe, we can find symbolism that is spiritual in the core of the number 3. And now the symbolism of the story. The man walking on the sea, a foot above the water level, could only be in a spiritual dimension. The ocean as a symbol of the unconscious and also of our emotions. We are going to be talking about that in the Congress in September, right? About our emotions. The island would be a state of greater lucidity with many rocks or places for support. When he turns to the horizon, he saw the red hue of a fire on the continent he had just left, meaning the purification occurring in the material dimension. Just what Joanna was talking to us, right now. the way that we work in this bodily life to develop the soul, to evolve spiritually. And the bird is a psychopomp, a guide of the soul, that tells him that he has reached the land of men who have become ripe fruits of the great tree and who can bequeath new seeds to the future, meaning that the soul has accomplished its task and is ready for its future work, its next step in its evolution and to help others. Don't we all want to achieve that, right? And so the last PowerPoint is a synchronicity of today that in my YouTube was just, I was actually listening to some news about Manchão do Caminho. We can talk a little bit about that later, and by Divaldo. And then it just came this sentence by Trigueirinho that is the same of this small story. Earthly existence is directed towards a definition of evolutionary paths. The planetary moment does not allow for digressions. There is a specific goal for each being, and it is necessary for him to open himself to what the inner world sends him in order to reveal it. Some who are asleep will awaken. There will be hundreds of them, and beyond the fog, they will begin to discern a portal. In the hearts of those who are conscious, the sun never sets. So I thought it was so beautiful that I had to, because it's something that Joanna is saying all the time, right? Okay, Fabrizio, now we can say, I have some comments if people want to, but at first I would like to see what people's comments or questions.
Yeah, what we can do, we have maybe another 10, 15 minutes for questions and answers, and then we will stop the recording, and then we go to the last part of our study group, which is our perhaps personal stuff that we want to share within the group. So on that note, has got oh, okay, Silver Gibbons. I was gonna ask if anyone has got anything to say or ask. So Silver Gibbons?
Okay, just one thing very briefly. It's just you're talking about birds and the meaning and everything of the three. Last Thursday, I went to this exhibition here in London about Tutankhamun, and it was an immersive experience. And part of it, we had the virtual glasses and everything, and we were actually flying with horrors through the underworld, and starting on his body and then going as his spirit lifted the body. It was really interesting because they had actually the spirit lifting the body and you with him, and as he was, there was the judgment of Maat, and we went through that, measuring the heart and the feather and everything, and then going, and then horrors, actually, you were okay, your heart was light, was pure, and we were flying with horrors, and it was an incredible sensation because he was flying and you're just flying next to him almost. And when you said that, I sort of remembered it, and you think, oh, the three, and I thought, what a coincidence. We always keep having these moments. I find so interesting that something happens and then you talk about it, or you have an experience in the beach, and I'm sure it happens to everyone. Because I don't know if it's still lasting when you're here, but when you come, if you can go, it's really special. So just that.
Let's cross fingers, cross fingers. Yeah,
And
it's a powerful synchronicity, Sylvia.
yeah, and another thing as well, I think what you're saying about Pestalozzi is very interesting because Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French priest and philosopher, he has a thing: we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience. It's amazing how things from different directions comes into the same road. And I find this the synchronicity as well of it. How this study actually is making us coming from different roads, joining a single one. I find it very beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it's beautiful the way that the transpersonal dimension of the psyche, the collective unconscious, emerged. That's why we say that we are in times of spiritual awakening of the humanity. I was a little sat down, I could say, when I heard there will be it's not there will be Triguerin was saying it's not thousands. He said many people awakening, but we would like that it would be millions of people awakening so that we can have this shift of consciousness. But I think everything has, as we are studying in this year, as Joanna says, it's the conflict, and Jung also says to go to a next step of evolution, human beings still need some crisis and some conflict so then they can face, you know, they can face their shadows, their fears, their insecurities. And then maybe we are not going to be hundreds, we are going to be thousands or millions. Sylvia, have you raised her, Gabriele?
Yes. Can I just say something very briefly from what you were saying? It reminds me of this quote from Jung that he says, humanity will not grow as a whole, but there'll be individuals within that will grow, and the strength of the unconscious will lead others. And I think when he talks about the ones who, because somehow, not feeling, but we have learned so much that we almost come now to the responsibility that we have, all these teachers, Joanna, and connecting Jung and so many other philosophers and mystics, and we are learning all this. I think we take the responsibility to be some of the people in a very small way, the ones who be leading. We have this responsibility, I feel. So sorry to.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Sylvia. Each one of us that awakens to the spiritual reality, as Teilhard Chardin, my mother loved him, by the way, that says that we are, of course, spiritual beings in a bodily experience. And this knowledge, it's archetypal, right? We can forget, as Joanna says. The ego can be captured by culture, by education, or should we say uneducation, right? And can be kind of lost from the knowledge of the soul, from the knowledge of the self. But the knowledge is there, the seeds are there. So they will come, and yes, I agree totally. And Jung really says this, that we should trust the collective unconscious, because there is where we have these seeds of wisdom and love. Gabriele?
This subject is very interesting, and it's because some of us are still not so strong, but when we have this together, in the sense that we needed to know when, at the same time that we need to act, as Pessalozzi said, and we study with inner moral. Sometimes we need to know where we are stepping, and when Anna, you said that we are thousand, not millions. It's good to have this networking that we have here, and it's because then also when you said that is this life is only a fraction, and we know that sometimes we forget about this, maybe to give us strength to pursue and not to be so affected by external things, if you can understand me. Yeah, this today is, for me, is a bit of shaken and say, don't be so affected, and trying to see with the self, as you said. I'm only repeating what you're saying, but I think it is very nice, because when you understand more or less the game of life, because game of life sometimes is quite tricky, and when people are trying to play with the forces, but you put yourself there, what you believe, people pay, it's to recognize sometimes with people that you don't see, and yeah, and you feel more accomplished inside, and you don't feel empty. And yeah, this is, hey, only to say, sorry, but I didn't say much, but only to say that is very important what we're studying here today. Yeah.
No, Gabriele, it's very nice that you comment on that, because it just remind me, there's a Jungian author, Edward Edinger, then, and there's a book from the 70s, 70 something, 1970 something, that it's called The New God Image. Because remember, God, the God image is it's like almost a synonym to the self, because the self is like a totality of the psyche, right? It unifies, and it's the center also of the psyche. So it is, Jung also, and many Jungians call the self the God image, the inner God image, when we are talking about imago Dei in Latin. So what Edinger talks about, and also remember that I brought to you some slides from Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, American mythologist. And what Joseph Campbell asks, what's going to be the new mythology of humanity? And he kinds of answers in that book that we saw in the first, I showed you some slides. And he kind of says that the new mythology would be of an unified earth as of one harmonious being, because of this awakening, spiritual awakening, where we understand humanity as a whole and part of the world, right? And in not only part, but the world also as a living creature, because Jung talks about anima mundi, that is Plato's concept of unified and the soul of the world and of the cosmos. So everything would be interconnected and part of each other. But what I meant is that Edinger, and we are part in a sense, Edinger, when he talks about the new God image, that we are evolving, right? So the way that we can understand God, that we connect to God, is evolving too, right? Because when we say, what is God? And as in the Spirit's book, right? We have an answer, but it's a partial answer, because they say, like, we don't have concepts to understand, so they can explain better. We need to evolve more, not only intelligence, but morally, spiritually. So the thing is that Edinger says that our Imago Dei, that it's not, it's important to understand, since it's not the God of the theologians, okay, of the religions, is the transcendence, the transcendent one, the unity, the source of, Joanna says, cosmic life. She gives many names that are corresponding to God. And so we have a correspondence within us. And many Jungians call the self, they call Imago Dei. I think we have already talked about that. But in that book, Gabriele, is just because you talked about the networking and us as a group, as Sylvia also refers to other authors that say the same thing. And there are even Jung, it's small quantity of people, but when they start changing, they change the whole, because the whole is within us and we are part of the whole, right? It's a holographic paradigm that the small part is within the whole and the whole is within a small part. So it's in the transpersonal psychology, they talk about that a lot. So when you said something about that, Gabriele, about networking that we do and the way that we start feeling more balance, we start getting more support, right? We start changing ideas and we start growing together. That's what Silvia reminds us about Jung's sentence. That's great. So Edinger says that the self, the imago Dei, is a very particular aspect of the self, because it would be the collective self. So all of our selves, our spirits, are together. Remember Lionel Corbett's drawings, right? About each one of us being like a wave in an ocean. And so the wave you can see in the surface, but deep in the ocean, all the waves are the ocean. So I think this is very important, because Edinger is saying that the imago Dei is evolving, is transforming. And we, in groups like this, and Joanna, of course, is helping us in this transformation of the imago Dei. Because as we awaken to our spiritual reality, and in depth, because Joanna is bringing depth psychology and together with spiritist knowledge, then we can really reach that point where we are one. And this changes everything, because we know from our master and other light masters, but Jesus, we are near Easter, that he said, whatever you do to others, right, you do to me. So do to others what you would like them to do to you. These are very non-dualistic teachings, because when you recognize that deep in your psyche you are together with the whole of humanity, you are not separate. You are not going to hurt anyone, because if you hurt someone, you are hurting yourself. It's a non-dual perspective of reality. But it's the depth psychology perspective, right? So we can think in a dual way, like the ego, you and I, for instance, the ego and the outside world. But when we are talking about the self, remember that the self, our spirit, according to Joanna, has an aspect that is a collective self, that is together with all of other people's selves. Okay, it's just remember to talk about that after your comment, Gabrielle. So it's great that you talked about this networking. Okay, I think Lindalva wants to. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Hello, hi Anahy. Um,
Hi.
I just wanted to say that as you were talking about number 3 as well, when we are incarnated, we are also a trio, isn't it? Because we are spirit, perispirit, and physical body. So I just wanted to mention that. That is really, really interesting. But I wanted to share a reflection that I had today, because I usually take my dogs for a walk in the woods that we have close to our house. And I take that time to reflect. And I was reflecting about the workers of the last hour, you know, the passage in the gospel, the workers of the last hour. And I was asking myself, because we have an illustration of what that means in the gospel, but when we bring this to ourselves, I was asking, what is this work that we need to do? What is this work that we are having to do at this moment? As we know, when we are, as we are spiritists, or we are reading the spiritist teachings, not even needing to be a spiritist, what is this work that we need to do individually so that we are making the most of our time here, or these last moments, this last time we have to be busy here? And I was thinking about, looking into myself. I thought, I think what I, as a worker of the last hour, being a spiritist, my job is to be looking into myself and asking myself, or even watching myself, if I am applying the teachings of Jesus when I come to sort out my trials, when I receive a trial, when I receive a tribulation, when I receive a test. Am I applying forgiveness, the love for one another? Am I applying exactly what have already been mentioned? This idea that we are not individuals, we are a collective, we are a human family. Am I applying all of course, I'm not able to apply all of that in the most evolved way like Jesus did, but am I even trying to bring Jesus to the occasion and ask, ask myself, how am I going to deal with this? Because Jesus told me that I need to do this. And that as I have been facing many trials, this has come to my mind, and this is what I've been asking myself. So I think, to me, this moment bring this awareness that we, as workers of the last hour, and as a spiritist, I think that as I am a spiritist, my responsibility is to watch myself so that I am not behaving the same way that people who have not an awareness of spiritism, or even of God, or even of the natural laws, not as such, are not doing it. But I have a greater responsibility because I know all of this. I am aware of what my job, my responsibility is right now. And so I think it's an amazing moment, because we are having so many groups that are inviting us to have this reflection. And so this is what I am asking myself. Am I, as a spiritist, doing the best I can so that I am showing others around me a better way of dealing with the difficulties of life? So this is what I wanted to share with everyone today.
Thank you so much, Lindava. So it's very important what Lindava said, because it's asking ourselves and analyzing our thoughts, our behaviors is exactly what Joanna is asking us to do, right? Because of course she's working and with Francis of Assisi, right? And with of course we are all working in this in the light of Jesus' teachings. So we have a greater responsibility. I totally agree with you, Linda. It's not that we are not going to, at some point, let's say some of our shadow will appear, because I can have the will to to be nicer to someone that has hurt me. But remember the theory of the complexes, and Joanna in this text talks about that also. When we are caught by traumas or complexes from our childhood, for instance. But Joanna says that the core of all our illnesses are in the spiritual, our other incarnations that are going to be updated, let's say, to this incarnation. So we have to be very patient with ourselves, because when people say, Lindava, I will just give to Fabricio, when people say many times, oh, but I get anxious because I know I felt very upset, very even sometimes inside of me, not that I act violently, but I felt violence inside of me. And remember what Joanna says, well, this is part of your shadow, and the work is not deny it. It's accept, have compassion, and be merciful to yourself, so that if I accept that I still have this aspect within me, this aspect can be integrated, because it's like putting some light, exactly how you were talking with yourself, putting some light. You were analyzing yourself, right? Because you have had problems, difficulties. So how do I act? And remember, people, every shadow that we don't integrate, we are going to project onto others. And then, of course, then the enemy will be outside of myself and not inside of me. So to be compassionate and merciful to outside people that we, governments and things like that, trying to sell them as enemies, we have to pay attention, because we are not enemies. We are not enemies, countries, humanities. It's one. We fall in these traps. And because we don't do the homework to deal with our shadows. But I think it's perfect what you said, that we should remember we have all this knowledge, and our responsibility is greater than to people that don't have this knowledge. Thank you, Lindava. Fabricio, you want to say something?
Yeah, what I'm gonna say, I'm gonna invite now for us to move on to the last part of the study group. So I will stop the recording. So I'll say goodbye to everyone who is watching us online.